A power can construct a world without being the source of reality. It can organize matter, establish laws, create hierarchies, assign identities, govern everything within its reach, and still possess no authority beyond the system it controls. That distinction stands at the center of the Gnostic Codices. It is also the distinction that makes them dangerous to every structure that depends upon obedience without recognition. In 1945, 13 leather-bound papyrus codices were discovered near Nag Hammadi in Upper Egypt. Before that discovery, much of what survived about Gnostic thought came through writers who opposed it. The systems were described from the outside, usually by institutions committed to defeating them. Nag Hammadi changed the available record. The texts could finally speak through their own internal structures. The Apocryphon of John, the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Truth, the Hypostasis of the Archons, on the origin of the world, trimorphic protonoia. These writings do not come from one author, one community, or one centralized institution. They vary in language, emphasis, and narrative form. Yet beneath those differences, a structure repeats. There is an originating source, there is an ordered fullness, there is a rupture, there is a lower governing authority, there is a constructed world. There is a human being who does not originate entirely from that world. There is a mechanism of control. There is recognition, and there is a path of liberation that does not require the system's permission. The Gnostic structure begins by separating two things that most religious systems place together: the source of existence and the ruler of the world. In a conventional creation structure, the being who constructs the world is assumed to be the ultimate source. Its ability to govern becomes evidence of its absolute authority. The Gnostic Codices break that equation. They distinguish ultimate origin from local administration. They present the highest source as ungenerated, immeasurable, self-sufficient, and prior to the conditions through which hierarchy and control become possible. From this source proceeds the Pleroma, the ordered fullness in which emanation remains aligned with origin. Multiplicity exists, but it has not yet become fragmentation. Structure exists, but structure itself is not the problem. The problem begins when generation occurs without complete alignment. The figure of Sophia occupies this point of rupture. What emerges through misaligned generation does not possess the fullness of the order from which it indirectly derives. It is partial, enclosed, and unable to perceive the complete structure above it. From that condition arises the Demiurge. The Demiurge is not powerless. That is precisely what makes the structure important. It can organize, it can differentiate, it can construct, it can command, it can govern the material domain with functional authority. Its limitation is not a lack of power. Its limitation is ignorance of origin. It controls a world and therefore mistakes itself for the source of all worlds. It possesses jurisdiction and interprets that jurisdiction as total sovereignty. This produces one of the most consequential claims in the Gnostic Codices. A system can be coherent, powerful, and internally consistent while remaining ignorant of the reality beyond its boundaries. Order does not prove ultimacy. Control does not prove origin. The existence of a system does not prove that the system contains the complete explanation for its own existence. A derived authority stabilizes itself by presenting its environment as total. The material world must appear complete from within, because any visible incompleteness would weaken the authority governing it. Control therefore reaches beyond physical force. It regulates the horizon of perception. It establishes what can be recognized as real, what can be expressed through language, what can be accepted as legitimate, and what the individual is permitted to understand as self. The system does not need to announce itself as a prison. It presents itself as reality. That is a far more efficient form of control. Force is temporary. Architecture is continuous. The individual sees through senses formed within the system, interprets through language inherited from the system, receives identity through roles validated by the system, and seeks authority from institutions produced by the system. Eventually, the enclosure no longer feels imposed. It feels natural. Familiarity becomes normality. Normality becomes truth. And the individual participates in maintaining the structure without experiencing that participation as submission. But the Gnostic account introduces a variable the material system cannot fully absorb: The human being is not described as a unified product of one origin. The body belongs to the constructed order. It is shaped within matter, bound by time, exposed to decay, and regulated by the conditions of the world. But within that structure exists another component, a spark, breath, seed, or presence, whose origin does not belong to the governing system. The human being, therefore, contains the same division presented in the cosmology. The external structure corresponds to the material order. The internal presence corresponds to the higher source. The conflict between source and ruler is not happening only somewhere in the heavens. It is concentrated within the human condition. This is why the system can regulate the body without fully accounting for the being inside it. It can assign a role. It can define a history. It can classify behavior. It can reward conformity and punish deviation. But it cannot completely absorb what it did not generate. Control, therefore, depends upon misidentification. The individual must identify exclusively with the body, the role, the history, the environment, and the authorities that validate them. The internal component does not need to be destroyed. It needs only to remain unrecognized. This is why ignorance in the Gnostic Codices is not simply a lack of information. Ignorance is a structural condition. It is the condition of identifying with what was constructed while forgetting what existed before the construction defined you. And this is why Gnosis cannot be reduced to education. A person can accumulate enormous amounts of information while remaining fully enclosed within the structure that organizes that information. Knowledge can improve navigation inside a system without ever revealing the system as a system. Gnosis operates differently. Gnosis is recognition. It is not the addition of new material to an existing identity. It is the moment the foundation of that identity becomes visible as partial. What appeared ultimate becomes derivative. What appeared natural becomes constructed. What appeared external becomes recognizable as an architecture operating through perception, language, identity, authority, and repetition. The individual does not become something new. The individual recognizes a relation that was never completely erased. That recognition changes the meaning of everything without requiring everything to disappear. The body remains, the world remains, institutions remain, material conditions remain. What changes is their authority. Participation may continue, but identification no longer does. This is the mechanism of liberation preserved within the Gnostic Codices. Liberation does not begin with defeating the system. It does not require replacing one external ruler with another. It does not depend upon perfect compliance, institutional approval, or the system agreeing that you are free. It begins with the withdrawal of misplaced authority. The governing structure is reclassified. What appeared absolute is recognized as local. What appeared final is recognized as bounded. What appeared to define the self becomes one condition through which the self is temporarily operating. This is not rebellion in the ordinary sense. Rebellion can remain completely dependent upon the authority it opposes. It allows the system to continue determining the terms of engagement. Recognition creates a different condition, non-correspondence. The system continues transmitting its definitions, but the internal reference no longer answers to them. The system offers identity, but identity is no longer received from it. The system presents limitations, but limitation is no longer mistaken for origin. The system continues functioning. It simply loses the power to define the entire field. This is what makes the Gnostic Codices more than a collection of ancient religious writings. They form an operational map. Origin explains authority. Rupture explains misalignment. The Demiurge explains derived power. The Archons explain regulation. The human structure explains instability within the system. Ignorance explains identification. Gnosis explains recognition. Liberation explains the withdrawal of correspondence, and terminal resolution explains what happens when what was never truly unified is finally distinguished. The material system does not become the Pleroma. Derived authority does not transform itself into the source. The division is not resolved by pretending that every structure is ultimately the same. Resolution occurs through alignment. What corresponds to origin returns to origin. What remains aligned with the constructed system continues within its conditions. No external tribunal is required. The structure sorts by correspondence. This is the complete architecture examined in Gnostic Codices Decoded, Gnosis and the Mechanics of Recognition in the Nag Hammadi Codices by D.S.E.A. This book does not merely describe what the Gnostics believed, it decodes how their system functions. Using the Apocryphon of John, the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Truth, the Hypostasis of the Archons and other Nag Hammadi writings, it reconstructs the complete sequence: origin, emanation, rupture, derived authority, construction, control, recognition, liberation, and final resolution. The texts are placed beside one another so that their recurring mechanics become visible, not as isolated mythology, but as a coherent architecture. You will see how authority becomes separated from origin, how an incomplete system presents itself as total, how control becomes invisible by operating through perception, language, identity, and repetition. How the human being contains an internal component the system cannot fully explain. Why Gnosis is not acquired information, religious belief, or institutional instruction. And why liberation begins when recognition withdraws authority from everything that falsely claimed to define the whole. The central question is not whether a system possesses power. The question is where that power came from, what its limits are, and why it requires those within it to mistake its boundaries for the boundaries of reality itself. A system can regulate what it produces. It cannot fully contain what does not originate from it. Gnostic Codices Decoded reveals the map of that difference. Once the architecture becomes visible, the system may continue operating, but it can no longer convincingly call itself the whole. Gnostic Codices Decoded by D.S.E.A. is available now on Amazon.